So here are some randomly selected questions on the spring practice final. Actually, they're questions that I didn't have video explanations for, so I'm going to make them now. So on this particular question, it's a fill in the blank. It says a standard form quadratic is, and you have all these options. And I hope we remember that quadratic equations are those that have power of 2. Anything x squared, like y equals x squared, that's a quadratic. And also this one, it's a quadratic because it has a power of 2. This is a quadratic formula. That's not it. But a standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. So this guy goes up here in option A. And then it says a vertex form quadratic. I hope we remember that a vertex form is this guy right here, where your h and k are your vertex, right? So this one, option B, or that next one goes right there. And then it says the vertex formula, that's x equals negative b over 2 times a. That goes right there. And then the discriminant, I hope everybody remembers that the discriminant is the value inside the square root, which is the b squared minus 4ac, which goes right there, okay? So you got to know all your different formulas and forms. So anyway, let's move on to the next question. Here's a question where we are reviewing our skills on exponents and the rules of exponents. So the rule is that whenever you have an x on top and an x on the bottom, they cancel out, right? So in this case, we have x to the 5th power. There's 5 x's on the bottom, and there happens to be 9 x's up on top. So, I mean, you could write it out and say x, 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 x. That's 5 x's, and then 9 on top, x, x. But that would take a really long time. I don't recommend it. It's easier to just be like, instead of canceling 1x with 1x, 1x with 1x, canceling, and then counting how many are left, it's really easy. You could do it in your head. There's 5 x's on the bottom, which all cancel out with 5 of the 9, leaving you 4 left over. So it's x to the 4th that's left over up on top. That's what we have right here, 4 x's left over up on top. And on the other ones, the y's, there's 3 y's up on top that completely cancel with 3 of the 4 on the bottom, leaving you 1 left over on the bottom. So what's our answer going to be? It's still a fraction. Up on top, we have an x to the 4th, and on the bottom, we have y to the 1, which you don't even need to put the 1. There's your answer, x to the 4th over y. And there will be a question almost identical to this one on the final exam. Let's move on to another question. Another 2 questions, I believe, that are still on the rules of exponents. Let's look at this first one. This one doesn't have any canceling rule, but it does have the power of 0 rule and also negative exponent rule. We should remember that anything to the power of 0 ends up canceling out. It becomes 1. But then again, if you did write out like x to the 7th times 1, that's not going to change anything. So you could just cancel it out. Now, we do have, let me scratch this out for a bit. Okay, so we still have a z to the negative 3, and anytime you have a negative exponent, you grab it and you move it to the other side of your fraction. And if you're like, I don't have a fraction, okay, just put a fraction bar and make it look like a fraction, and the z to the negative 3 comes down, and it becomes z to the positive 3 on the bottom. So when you move it from one side to the other, the negative exponent changes to a positive. So there's no more z's up on top. You could put a line through it if you want. Your final answer will be the fraction x to the 7th, that's what was left over up here. Everything else, this canceled and this moved. So x to the 7th is the only thing left over up on top. And the z to the negative 3 that moved down became z to the positive 3 on the bottom. So z to the positive 3 on the bottom. There's your final answer for this question. X to the 7th over z to the positive 3. Anyway, moving on to the next question. This one also has it doesn't have any canceling, but it does have negative exponent rules. So the x to the negative 5th, I have a negative exponent. I want to grab it and move it up to the top, and it's going to become positive. So I'm going to put x to the positive 5th right here, and we are multiplying. Okay, so it's no longer at the bottom. It is now up on top. And then this y to the negative 3 is no longer up on top. We're going to grab it and move it down to the bottom. It's going to be y to the positive 3 on the bottom. So I could just scratch it out because I already moved it down to the bottom. So what do I have right now? I have a x to the 5th times x to the 7th, and that's rule 1 of exponents, where you add the exponents. So x to the 5th times x to the 7th is x to the 12th, not x to the 35th. You don't really multiply them. If you're multiplying, you really add exponents. 5 plus 7 is 12. And on the bottom, we have y to the 2 plus 3, that is 5. So we have y to the 5th down here. So there's your answer, x to the 12th over y to the 5th. And let's move on. We have another question that has, or not, fill in the blanks that have drop-down menus. So it says the discriminant is blank. Well, we should all remember that the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. Okay. So the discriminant, I'm just going to write it in, is b squared minus 4ac. That's technically the value inside the square root of the quadratic formula. So I wrote the quadratic formula here and I put the discriminant in red. So whatever you get when you calculate b squared minus 4ac, that's your discriminant value, and that is the value inside the square root. Now it says right here, if the discriminant is blank, it will have one real solution. So think about the value, this red value inside the square root. If it's positive, then you could do the square root of a positive number, and then you could add that positive number, then subtract that, subtract that number, and you're going to get two different answers. So when your discriminant is positive, you get two answers. When your discriminant is 0, like let's say you calculated b squared minus 4ac and you got 0, when you do the square root of 0, it's going to be 0, and it doesn't matter if you add 0 or subtract 0, it's still going to be 0. I mean, it's still going to be that same answer that you started with. So adding and subtracting 0 is not going to produce two different answers. It's only going to produce one real answer, one solution. So if the discriminant is 0, it's going to have one real solution. So you should put 0 right here. If your discriminant is 0, you're going to have one real solution. Now, when will you have no real solutions? When your discriminant is negative. Because if you have a negative number and you do the square root of negative 25, that's going to be a 5i. It's imaginary. You're not going to have no real solutions. So if your discriminant is negative, you're going to have no real solutions. Now, if your discriminant is positive, you're going to have two real solutions. Again, because if this is any positive number, you could do the square root of any positive number, and it's going to give you real numbers, real decimal answers. And you'll be able to add and subtract that real decimal answers, producing two answers. So if your discriminant is positive, it's going to give you two real solutions. Two real solutions. Anyways, I hope this helps. There's still one last question where it says, this is the easiest one you're going to see on the actual final exam. It says, use the graph to determine the solutions. Here's your graph. What are the solutions? It is the points of intersections. -3 and +1. Those are your answers. -3 and +1. So that would be your answer right there, -3 and +1. Because x-intercepts are the solutions. They are the answers.